Welcome back for part 2 of Why Worship Matters for Discipleship. If you have not yet listened to episode 10, please do so before listening to this podcast and you'll be up to speed. My name is Mitchell Halstead, and I am once again joined by my teaching minister, Josh Diggs, and our new worship associate minister, Sean Alex Smith. Enjoy. Let's dive into singing a little bit more here. We've already talked about the fact that singing is not the only form of worship to God, but I do think the average person is probably going to think of worship as being synonymous with music and with the act of singing. So our worship, I mentioned earlier that our worship services at Clear Creek is a little different than many churches in that we don't have instrumental accompaniment, but we absolutely have music. It just is a voices only style. But as you might, whether your church looks like ours or whether your church looks like, a Hillsong music video, which, with every aspect of the show involved and the incredible amount of production, no matter what version of church you go to, what version of worship, the singing aspect of it, the singing of the participants, their voices is the central pillar upon which all of that is built around. So I want to ask this simple question. Why does singing matter?
I would say, in my opinion, singing isn't as much the central pillar of worship as the heart is, but singing is the primary kind of output or response. But I would say that singing is really, I like the word, the overflow. It's good. Kind of to build off of what you said, we're pouring out of our cups after we've been filled with God's breath in our lungs. I heard the quote one time at school at Harding. They said, "We sing when words are not enough." So singing in many ways assigns value to something that words can't by themselves.
That's good. Yeah, what he said.
It's true. There's something different about applying the musical nature to words that you could have just said out loud, read off a piece of paper, but when you have to sing them, there's a whole different level of emotional connection with that act that is not necessarily present when you're simply reading words. So
I would say that singing is really the voice and the sound of your church.
It's one of the few things that a church can do all at the exact same time. That's true. I hadn't really thought about that. The voice of the church. We often do talk about the idea of singing with one voice. That's a phrase you hear sometimes, That's cool. We worship God as one. All right, now we talked a lot about congregational stuff, but it seems like you could worship God entirely in isolation if you wanted to, and I can't think of a reason why God would not accept that worship. But why is communal worship important? And in what ways is the congregational act of doing something an asset to those of us that participate in it?
I think that you can have both. I don't think this is really a either or sort of thing. I mean, it's really a both and sort of deal, because I think that the communal worship is just absolutely a necessity, because it helps you stay connected to your church community, your church family, and I think it really gives a sense of not being alone. There's a lot of people that I know who have grown up in smaller churches, less than 100 people or so, and the first time they go to like a large youth rally or a conference, they say something along the lines of, I just didn't know that there were so many other people like me. So I think worship in the communal sense really gives a sense of belonging. I think that communal worship is, you've probably heard the phrase, a shot in the arm. And it's definitely the most powerful way for me to be moved or encouraged or get my batteries recharged. I think of Psalm 122:1, where it says, "I was glad when they say unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord." And it's a sense of, we're all coming together. This isn't something that we have to do, but come on, let's go into the house of the Lord together.
Yeah, I think that's a really important maybe distinction, because, I'm just going to be real frank. Growing up, and this was not something that was taught to me, but I think it was something that was self-imposed. It was the idea that Christianity, walking with the Lord, is primarily defined by what I ought to do versus what I get to do. So it's the shoulds, the ought tos, right? And so when I hear this question, I think the young Josh says, well, you ought to do so. And there's all sorts of reasons for this, right? Of course, there's the mutual encouragement, there's blessing others, there's the oft quoted, Hebrews 10:25, don't forsake the assembly, as some of you are in the habit of doing, and so it becomes an ought to kind of a thing. And then the question comes, well, wait a minute, if we could do this on our own, and in fact, because of culture and because of technology, we could do it even maybe better online, because you can curate your worship experience to your taste. You can pick the best production. You can do it to the point that you can see the ones leading the worship far better than you could in a large room, especially if you're further back. So, all this, you can set it up just for you. I think there's two things. Number one, yes, does God honor individual worship? I sure hope so. Otherwise, Paul was in a bad way while in prison. John on the island of Patmos was in trouble, right? It says, though, on the Lord's day, so he's worshiping God, the Lord Jesus showed up to him. So I believe isolated or personal worship is valuable. However, instead of asking the question or framing it as you ought to, my thought is always this: it is more of a check against my own heart whenever I begin to say, I don't want to. And here's what I mean by this. What is it about the corporate gathering that leads me, or in the moments where I go, I don't want to do this with other Christ followers? For me, it's not a oh, you should now feel different. Rather, it's a, okay, God, why do I feel the way that I feel? Because if I love my brothers and sisters like family, and I know we fight, I know those things, but if I love them and if they love me, and if I see the imago Dei, the image of God in the people around me, and we get to encourage one another, and if those things are all true, then what's going on in my heart that I just do not want to? Is it because I'm just too tired because it's been a hard week and the thought of having to expend more energy is just draining? That's possible. Is it because I'm at odds with another Christ follower that I'm going to see in the gathering? And if that's the case, then it calls me to say, okay, so I need to then practice reconciliation or forgiveness or confession. So for me, this is a great question. Why is it important? Because it becomes a check against the heart and what may be going on in the heart. So if discipleship is key, that I want to live and walk like Jesus, this gives me yet one more way to evaluate how I'm walking, not to beat myself up, but to say, Jesus, I want to be more like you. And this is one of the ways I get to check and see where I am at. And as I do it, as you already said, man, it is awesome when the body sings together. It's fantastic. By the way, one last thing. Have you noticed if it's one or two people, you can tell if the other person is off key or behind and all that? Have you noticed this? But you get a crew, 10, 20, 50, 100, 200, 1,000, however many people, all of a sudden together, we're able to sort of wash over our imperfections, and what is created is beautiful.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point.
Blends. Yeah, that's great. All right, so let's dig into this idea of sacrifice for a moment. So how is a form of worship like singing, how does it involve an element of sacrifice? We've talked a lot about making an offering, making a gift to God. How is the sacrifice element important here?
Overall, worship is a time for me when I can lay it all down at the feet of Jesus. It's a time for me to bring in my struggles, my heartaches, maybe my groanings, and sacrifice it by giving it to Jesus to bear. And there have been so many times that I've just mentally had a choice to make. Am I going to do X, Y, and Z, or am I going to choose to go to worship? And I find myself standing in the time of worship, thinking to myself about what I almost picked over God. But, here I am in worship for that moment. And I think that that's a sacrifice within itself, because you're saying, for this moment, I know I don't get it right all the time, but, for this moment, I want to intentionally choose God over what I feel like, what I'm being pulled towards that's not good. As far as singing goes, though, I think that many people don't feel comfortable singing, and we'll talk about this, but because they don't feel like they're gifted at it. But I think for those people, sacrifice could start by just simply singing to God, by giving out of your poverty something that you're uncomfortable with, something that you're not good with, and saying, you know what, God, I think you're worthy of this. And because of that, I know I'm not good, but I'm going to give what I can.
Mm-hmm. That's really good. Yeah, I think it's such a great question. So what is the significance of sacrifice in worship, giving of God? And again, I go back to Romans 12:1. That for me, guys, just is sort of an anchoring verse for this entire conversation. So that's going to be a repeated drum in my mind. So offer your bodies as living sacrifices. And then he says, this is your spiritual act of worship, right? So sacrifice obviously has to do with giving up of something. And I think in worship or in celebrating the goodness of God, enjoying God, there are a few things that I'm giving up. One, I'm giving up the authority to control my own life. I'm giving up the authority or the posture as the most important being in my own life. These are all idols and issues I struggle with. Maybe you guys don't. And that's a legitimate statement because everyone has different things they struggle with. But for me, what I'm sacrificing is I'm sacrificing my personal will in the statements I'm making through song to God. I'm declaring He is God, I'm not God. So that, in a lot of ways, is the sacrifice. I'll tell you one other way that this sort of plays itself out, for me at least, is I don't know if you've ever been in these places where you're singing, the song is just beautiful, the arrangement is moving, the way that the notes play with each other and interact, you just go, oh, it's great. And I remember the days, some of you all may know what I'm talking about, but you remember the days of the old hymnals, right? Now today in our church, of course, we use screens, etc. But I remember often being so consumed and concerned with making sure I got the notes correct because it sounds good, right? You don't want to mess up and, when you hit this note and they hit that note, just, it's great. And I miss the moment of worship because I'm so concerned with the form of the offering. And again, so when it comes to sacrificing, I think even in that moment, that has been historically a place where I get to say, okay, God, the sacrifice is not in having a perfect, as you said, Sean, Alex, a perfect sound, but out of the poverty of what I have, I'm giving it to you. And here's the thing that then has struck me, and this hit me about 2 weeks ago again, because we were singing as a family. We do this every night during our Advent readings. We'll read a section, and we'll sing some songs together. And I try to harmonize, or I'll try to do this, and sometimes it is horrific, and I'll just have to laugh at myself. Here's what hit me, though. My very best, according to Scripture, is still like filthy rags. So the very best offering, so by the way, when we get into this question about, hey, what about the person who can't sing very well? Guess what? Those of us who feel like we sing really, really well, and even those who categorically, based on human standards, do sing very well, when we get to heaven and we hear the voices of angels and see the perfection of God, we're all going to go, why were we so nervous about singing down there? We all stunk to begin with by comparison. Yay, God. So I again think that for me is just a way to kind of process it.
Sure. You guys have both talked about the idea of what about those people that feel like they're so bad at singing that to engage in it would just be an embarrassment to them and maybe a distraction to others. Very brief story. So one of my favorite worshipers of all time was a youth deacon of ours. His name was Dave. And he would acknowledge this. He's one of the worst singers I've ever heard. But every camp,
Dave, we love you if you're watching this.
You know you are. Every camp, every Devo, every retreat, he in no way was ashamed to sing. And it was never good. Like distractingly bad in some cases, but he saw it as a sacrifice of worship. He was giving what he had in offering to God. And I respected that so much, even if I had to go stand on the other side of the room. Actually, I usually tried to go to, because I feed off that energy of just someone who loves the joy of singing. So I actually enjoyed being near him, but he could not sing well. And yet he pushed through because he saw it as a gift. The best he had relative to others didn't matter. The best he had, he was willing to give it. And I always really appreciated that. Any other thoughts on this idea?
You got something there?
Dude, I think that's awesome. I mean, I think that I heard it one time. I'm trying to remember how to say it right. I mean, it's not do we have a voice, it's do we have a song? And that's what I think of when you say that story.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Cool.
So you ask anything else, I'll say this, and I'll be done. I'll be done. I wonder, the story where Jesus is there at the temple and he's watching people come and give their offerings.
Yep.
And you have those who have a lot to give, and they give a bigger percentage than some who don't have as much. But he singles out the woman with just the 2 pennies, the 2 mites. And she is ashamed because her offering, by comparison, is so small. But what I think is so empowering to me is that the Lord, as you just said, I love that phrase, Sean Alex. Say it again.
Oh no.
On the spot.
It's not a.
Not if you have a voice, but do you have a song? Something
Yeah,
like
that's
that?
what- yeah.
Okay. See, here's what I love about that is this woman, by spiritual comparisons, did not have much of a voice. She did not have much to give, but she gave it. Versus someone who rolls in and is able to give out of the abundance, but only gives a small amount compared to what they actually have. So this is the person, again, this is Josh. This is Josh coming in. I know this song. I'm just going to roll through it. I'm going to hit all the notes. I've got the roll, but I'm thinking about something else in the process. I'm less concerned with the one I'm giving to. So I would just encourage someone who, if you don't have a good voice, fine. Do you have a good heart?
Yeah.
Are you giving to the Lord that gift?
It's really the degree of sacrifice. So if you're listening and you're like, that's me, I sound terrible. It's not about how you sound. It's about where your heart is in it. So give, and you will be blessed by it, and you will bless others. I am a testament to that from my experience with Dave. All right, last question, then we're going to wrap this up. So we're all ministers here at the same place. So what is the church's responsibility in facilitating worship?
I think I want to zoom out for like 1 second to frame this. I think that lots of the times we have messed up because we get in the way of God, because we've overcomplicated things. I think Rick actually referenced one time a Jesus plus doctrine. When I look through the Bible, I find that lots of the times it's much more simple than we've often made it. So that being said, when it comes to worship, I think that we need to get out of the way for the Holy Spirit to work and intervene. You referenced the widow's mite story. When I think of this, I thought earlier of like the Tower of Babel. We're trying to make everything absolutely perfect to attain. And I think lots of the time, I think it's great to have a spirit of excellence in everything that we do, but I don't think we need to do it in a way where that is the end goal. I think everything that we do can be modes and methods to enhance and stir, but at the end of the day, it's the Holy Spirit who comes through and through the words of the songs that we're singing, stir somebody's spirit to reorient themselves back to Him. And I think that as leaders, as shepherds, as the worship leaders, we just need to make sure that we are creating a path for that to happen.
That's good. I'll give you 2 more P's to go with your path idea here. So, it's a little preacher alliteration.
Can't even help yourself, can
Dude,
you?
I'm paid by the alliteration. So please listen to the alliterations. No, I think there's just a couple things when we talk about the facilitating responsibility of the church. Number 1, yes, absolutely a path. And I would think of that as a path sort of into the presence of God. That what we do is to try to help people experience the presence of God. Number 2, I think we are helping people practice the ways they can worship God throughout the rest of the week. And you referenced this again earlier when it came to the different ways that we worship with our words, our body, our giving, our encouragement, whatever it is. So those are ways of practicing. And then the third one is the posture. And we've talked so much about that in this conversation, that our goal is not to put on a performance. It's not to be perfect. It's simply to come and say, what I have, I give. Will you receive it, Lord? So our facilitating is less about teaching them how to do it right, and it's more about saying, we want to give you a moment to enter the presence of God with a proper posture and practicing it here together so you can do it at home by yourself.
Path, practice, posture. Now you can fill in your sermon notes.
That's right.
Fill in the blanks, all of you following along at home. Well, thank you guys. This is all the time we've got for our podcast today. Sean Alex, I really appreciate you joining us. First ever podcast for you. It's like your third Sunday here, give or take. I'm glad that you were able to come and share your heart for worship and why you are excited to be here yourself. And I know I speak for our staff when I say that we're thrilled to have you join our team, and we cannot wait to witness how God uses you to build the kingdom just one medley at a time.
It's a blessing to be here.
That's good.
Josh, thank you as well for lending us your dulcet tones for our podcast today, and also to helping paint a picture of why worship matters for discipleship here at Clear Creek. To the rest of you out there, remember, if you are a disciple of Christ, you have been called to spread the good news of Jesus Christ to your neighbors throughout your city and to the very ends of the earth. Grace and peace.